Let's get going. So we're just after 12. That's fine. So good afternoon. Let me introduce firstly the panel briefly. So perhaps Tony and Simon, you care to go first?
Up to you, Tony.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tony Evans. I'm a member of the Institute's board. I've been involved as an interim. Actually, there's a typo there. It's not 20, it's 30 years standing now. But I've been doing this sort of thing for a long time. That's the important thing. I have a fair amount of experience and I work at CEO, MD level, involved with turnaround and transformational change. I think that's all we need to do, and I'm very pleased to be here to talk to people today.
Okay, and I'm Simon Hudson. We're representing Morphosis Partners. We are a partner to the Institute of Interim Management, and essentially we support executives at varying stages of their professional career in the context of interim, early stage, mid stage, or senior. And our role really with interim executives is simply to support them on that journey, to make it a smoother, more successful journey, so that as an interim you can continue to play to your strengths, which is what you deliver on assignment. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Lastly, Charles Stuart. So I'm also part of the IIM board. I've been a member pretty much since I started as an interim, literally 20 years ago in about a week's time, all around supply chain space, and most recently heavily in the life science space as well, which was never the plan originally, but that's the way things go. And I literally just finished my 19th assignment piece of work on Friday. So that's us. Let me crack us on. So today we will try and cover a whole load of areas at pace. Please, for those who weren't on earlier, if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A button that you can see at the bottom of your screen, hopefully. And we will pick those up as we go through. Tony, if you could perhaps keep an eye on those. Today we're looking to see if we can, or we're looking to share with you basically an introduction to interim management, what it is, what it isn't, things to look for, how to build a career, and so on. So let's keep going. A little bit just about who the IIM is. So it's because we're obviously hosting today. So with the Institute of Interim Management, the only professional body for interims in the country. We've been going since 2001, fully independent organisation, and we're a not-for-profit. It's run by executive board of, I love the word, seasoned interims. We all do it pro bono, it's all voluntary, and it's part of us committing and supporting to promoting the whole space of interim management in the UK. All the members, of which you will be invited to join at a later point in this session, are held to a code of conduct. And we do, as an institute, we work with various organisations, and in particular we have a number of affiliates who are interim service providers, agents, and as Simon mentioned in his intro, also with a number of partner organisations of like mind. So that's that. I guess one more slide for me, just things to sort of, we reasonably assume that you will look at these words on the screen and identify, yeah, that's me. Why am I here is fundamentally the question. What brings you here? What are you looking to get? And there's a whole load of things there that could be reasons. And every one of us who's an interim started our career somewhere and probably had the same sets of questions being considered at the time. Without further ado, let me move you on. So Tony, over to you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Right, okay. This next section of the presentation is really taking the bones out of a master's thesis that was written a few years, well, not too many years ago now, by a lady called Jo Minns, who's been involved with us at the Institute for some considerable time. And her master's thesis was on interim management, and you can see there that the whole thesis, there were 4 key objectives. So the next 5 slides or so will take us through some of those key findings to help you kind of establish what being an interim is, what it involves, and how things might work for you as a starting point. And the assumption for this webinar is that the people who are attending are all going to be those who are looking at the concept of becoming an interim as a career move. You can see on the right there that there were a number, 16 in fact, of in-depth interviews which Jo undertook with people with a range of experience across a range of functions. And there was also the usual large amount of background reading which she undertook, and then she brought it all together in order to produce the thesis. So during the conversation here, we'll try and walk through those 4 key objectives. You know, why on earth would you want to do this in the first place? What would success maybe look like for you as an interim, and how might you go about deciding that? What constitutes a successful interim? Well, how you measure your success is one element, but also there are no magic additional skill sets, behaviours or traits that an interim has beyond an individual in, shall we say, permanent employment. It's about the capability in some of those areas where they're significantly improved, if you like, over the way that the requirements of a permanent employee would exist. So it's how you play the tune, if you like, on the things that are most important to be a successful interim. And then the thesis was really sort of what recommendations might we be able to make for people when considering the interim career. So what I would expect is that it may trigger some thoughts for you, and it's at that point you might start wanting to put some questions, because everybody's inputs and thoughts and positions are going to be a bit different. So there will be an opportunity to get to try and deal with those questions. So Charles, if we can move on one. Thank you. All right, so the first thing to do is, well, when's a good moment to think about doing interim management? And there are the findings where there are 3 things that need to kind of come together in some way that mean that you're being able to get it right in your head for you. The first and obvious thing, when you stop and think about it for a moment, is where are you in your career in terms of your own development and the scope and scale of role that you're doing now. It's important that if you're comfortable with that, if you enjoy doing the things that are within that role, then that's maybe a good opportunity to think about making the career change, because that's the sort that is what any client that you look for is going to be buying. It's your output against that experience and those skill sets that they're going to engage. That's what they're going to buy. So if you're not at the stage where you think, yeah, I could do this for a good number of years now, this kind of thing, perhaps parceled up in different ways, but if you're not at that point, then you need to think about when you are going to be at that point. What additionally do you need to put in there? Because the client isn't going to pay for your personal development. They're going to pay for the output, you actually doing stuff. Interim is all about implementation and action. You need to also be quite comfortable in your own skin. It is not about what other people think of you. This is about how you regard yourself. What measures are you going to place on yourself to say, I am being successful? Not what the client is going to do, but what are you going to do? And that's quite a significant mind shift for quite a lot of people. And then the actual point in time, what's going on in your environment, which really is asking you to think about, what am I doing? Am I enjoying what I'm doing? Do I want to continue what I'm doing? And if I don't, what do I want to do instead? For a lot of people, actually a point of redundancy occurs, or it might be that something has happened in your own family life or the environment, something which has pulled you up a bit and said, okay, what am I doing? And do I want to do something differently? These are key elements at that point in time, the classic inflection point. Thanks, Charles. If we just think about what might we expect from interim roles, so what's the benefit? Why on earth would you do this? It is fair to say that these things that you see on this this spectrum, if you like, it's not really a spectrum but a line, are all relevant. And that is, you do get more of a variety of work, if for no other reason than you'll work for a range of clients. And so you're going to be working in different places, different environments, different cultures, organizations at different points in their evolution, that kind of thing. And that variety, I can tell you, is great to experience. There's always going to be a challenge. Nobody's going to buy you for business as usual, run-of-the-mill stuff. Real interim roles are about change. So the IIM runs an annual survey. It's been doing it for over 15 years now, or about 15 years. And the survey information says that over 90% of all interim assignments across the whole market in the UK involves some kind of significant change that you're going to be majoring on behalf of the client. And that's an important point to understand. So if change floats your boat, it's a great place to be. If you really just want to keep everything nice and calm and neat and just the same as it was yesterday, then this is probably not a great place for you to be. Work-life balance is yours to do with as you will. The nature of your contract, the nature of your work, the fact that it is always short-term. I mean, the longest interim contracts I've come across happen for about 2 years tops. Typically, they're between 9 and 12 months, and often they'll be 6 months or less. So it is quite variable in terms of length of time. It's variable where geography is relevant to everybody. So where are you prepared to work? Is it within 50 miles of where you live? If it is, that could be quite constraining for you. Are you happy going anywhere on the planet? In which case you might be finding yourself in a war zone or somewhere that's extremely remote. So going back a few months, for example, I actually saw an interim assignment for somebody to be running the Falkland Islands management company. It is remote. So that's the extreme. If you want to be within 30 miles of the City of London, it's at the other end of the spectrum. So you need to be thinking about that. The freedom from corporate politics bit is relevant, but in an odd way. You don't have to play in the politics. You can stand back from it. But what is important is that you understand it, because it will influence the way that people operate, all working around you. So you have to know what's going on, why it's going on, so that you can influence that and get things done that you're being asked to do under your contract. So you can't ignore it, but you don't have to become a political player, which is freeing. You do need to maintain a significant level of independence. That's not to say you don't ever speak to anybody, but it is to say that you don't want to be getting dragged into all the nits and grits of the way the company operates. You need to be able in the end, whoever your client boss, as it were, is in the organisation, this means you can speak truth to power. Whereas if you're an employee, that could be severely career limiting. It's part of the deal. If you're a proper interim, you need to be able to tell people when it's not right, or if they've missed something, whatever. They need to be made aware of what the reality actually is. Flexibility is very important. You need to be able to deal with a whole raft of situations, and maybe what worked and how you worked in one organisation isn't necessarily going to play well in the next client organisation. So there's another point that will come up in a minute, but adaptability is also very important with that. Because you're in much more control of your life, there's less stress, but it doesn't mean there's no stress, because when you're working, you'll find you're working. So Charles, if we move on. Now, having talked about some of the benefits, these are some of the key skills that have popped up, if you like, through all that research, which it's very, very important you have in large quantity as a practicing successful interim. You obviously have to be able to build rapport, and underpinning that is that you can provide the client with that sense of being very credible very quickly. Whether you will stand and fail or fail on whether or not you can build that credibility quickly. So anything that goes to demonstrate that is going to be crucial to how you're going to be viewed through the assignment. Everything doesn't always run smoothly, which won't come as a shock, I suspect. So you do need to be resilient. You do have to work with various stakeholders in whatever organisation. They're not necessarily all beautifully aligned with what you need to do and when you need to do it. And you're being expected generally to work at a pace which permanent employees rarely, if ever, see. The concept, for example, of a new CEO getting 100 days to look round and start to build a plan is irrelevant, because the whole assignment could have been done within 100 days. You just do not get that kind of leisure of time. In many respects, time is your most important asset. You have to deal with ambiguity, that's for sure, because you'll get told many things by different people and they don't all align. You do have to remain focused on results, because your next assignment is only going to be available to you if you demonstrate that you have produced good results from the previous assignment, or if once you get experience, that you have a demonstrable track record of successful outputs from the work you do for the client. So you need to think about it perhaps in terms of a return on investment. Whatever you get paid in terms of your day rate, whatever, is the investment, and how much you return in terms of cost savings, increased sales, better gross margin, improved EBIT, whatever it might be, that's the equation that's relevant in the end. You do need to hit the ground running. Back to it's not a development opportunity. You do need to remain detached. You do need to keep that element of independence, although you need also obviously to be close enough to people to get them to do what you need them to do, to influence them and so on. But in the end, you're not from inside the business, although you are working inside the business or the organisation. And you do need to maintain a level of adaptability to be able to work in a whole raft of different environments. Thank you. So it's not all sweetness and light. There are certain things which can get in the way or aren't as good as you might like. These are some examples with quotes from the detailed interviewing processes. So assignment availability is clearly crucial. This is about supply and demand. Your job as your own sales department, if you like, thinking with your commercial hat on, is how do you get a good solid stream of work coming in? When you're on assignment, chances are you're going to be snowed under with work. You don't have lots of time free to go off and find the next one. Very difficult to do. So how do you go about maintaining your own network and points of contact and keeping some view forward to be able to look for additional work? The content of assignments is interesting because quite often as an interim, you'll be engaged to be involved in a particular slice of work. So it might be a program lasting 2 or 3 years and you're being asked to come in and do something where there's a real mess for 6 months to get them back on track again, for example. You may never see the whole shift. Certainly doing turnaround work, for example, which is typically in 3 phases, you might be in a position to sort out the nosedive so it doesn't crash and burn. You may get the opportunity to level it out so that you can start to see that the organisation is mending, but then you may well never get the opportunity to see it take off again and become a month-on-month, year-on-year profitable organisation with solid, good growth. Location we mentioned earlier, you need to be clear about where you will and will not work, and that can be geography, but it can also mean which sectors you may or may not wish to work. In the UK, we have interim activity across the private, the public and the third sectors, but it might be that your background is in the public sector and you only wish to work in the public sector, for example. And workload, I did mention on the way through, you tend to find working a day rate, your days are long. So if you really want to maintain 9 to 5 during this on an assignment, you're going to struggle because life is not like that when you're actually on assignment. You can back off a bit when you've finished the assignment while you're looking for the next one. But then, of course, you want to invest a lot of time finding the next one. Thanks. Can we move on one more? Okay. This is a good segue to be able for me to shut up and for Simon to tell you how to really get to the work. But you need to do these things. You need to make sure that although you're not going to be funded by your client in terms of your own personal professional development, you do need to do it. So you have to find ways and means that work for you to ensure that your knowledge base remains current. You've got to network like crazy. This comes easier to some people rather than others, but you really, really, really do need to do that. There are traditionally 2 routes to market. One is through your own network and the other is through, Joe's got here interim search firms. We call them ISPs, which are interim service providers. There are quite a number of those, and they're the equivalent of exec search and selection firms that you see in the world of permanent recruitment. There is a third route, which Simon represents, and that's somewhere between these 2 things. And I'm sure that'll become clearer as we go on. And I guess the final point I'd like to make is that you're as you gain in experience, you're going to have a track record built, and it becomes a little bit easier to be able to demonstrate to a third party, a potential client, that when they engage you, you can deliver this stuff, whatever it is. But in the end, being an interim is really who you are. It becomes, it's a bit chicken and egg, but if you've got the right frame of mind, you can become an interim, but it requires you to continue to grow and develop that frame of mind, and that's what you become. So I'll stop there and hand over. I think I hand over now to Simon. I don't think, yes, excellent. I don't have to talk to this slide. Right, over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Tony. And good to see people are still on the webinar, which obviously is great. So despite that, some of the
Even after me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, despite some of the sobering comments and observations, you know, it's good to see that, well, the audience clearly has that resolve and that commitment or intention to go down the interim path.
Well, hopefully people see it as a realistic balance.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see actually of those attending how many have already broken into the world of interim and perhaps are here more about the value of the Institute to further support that. So maybe within the chat or Q&A section, it'd be interesting maybe to get a view on that as to how many have already broken into the world of interim versus those who perhaps are looking to explore it as an option. But yeah, so let's talk about, I suppose, the practical reality of performing and sustaining as an interim professional. And I think there are a couple of observations just to sort of reiterate what Tony said. The first one is really about the fact that you're looking to capitalize on your acquired experience and expertise gathered and accrued over many years, typically in a permanent career path. Sometimes that can be transitioning from consultancy or advisory, but more likely it's going to come from the world of, dare I say it, being client side in the traditional PAYE route, whether that be as an expert in procurement or supply chain, HR, finance, doesn't really matter because very simply, if you look at the annual survey that the Institute of Interim Management puts together, you will see that almost every professional discipline and function is represented. So one of the thoughts really is not about could my skill set in supply chain or HR be relevant? It's more about, as Tony alluded to, really taking the view as to whether or not positioning yourself in market as an interim is actually going to suit you and suit you not just professionally, but also support the work-life balance that you are intending to achieve. And I think the other observation that Tony mentioned, which is iterated on this slide, is that, you know, getting hired is based on, can you come in and deliver something quickly and effectively that for whatever reason that business is either under-resourced for, is choosing not to want to be accountable for and wishes to put that accountability to a third party in the form of an interim, or perhaps they don't yet recognise what they do need. And I've seen a number of situations where interims often go into businesses to actually help them to understand the possibilities and the options available, which then will typically lead to, well, that's great. Can you then come and actually implement and deliver on those ideas that you've shared with us? So you've really got to be able to package up, I suppose, your expertise and be able to deliver that in a very coherent way to an audience, some of whom will be very positive and looking to capitalize on a growth opportunity with your expertise. And others, as Tony's alluded to, may be looking at you almost in a holding position role. But generally, it's either at the, can you resolve the problem of free fall, or can you help us to really capitalize with speed on a prevailing opportunity in the marketplace? And then the third observation is the fact that, you know, an interim professional has to be looking for work probably 2 times a year, maybe 3 times a year. Sometimes interim assignments can carry on for a couple of years, but generally speaking, it's high impact, quick turnaround. And those could be, let's say, 2 to 4 months, perhaps maybe 6 or 9. So there is an expectation then or requirement that, unlike a typical career as a permanent employee, your ability to actually navigate the job search, the assignment search landscape becomes more apparent. Next slide, please, Charles. So if we were to package up life as an interim and what is required, at Morphosis Partners, we basically label it under 3 headings: perception, comfort, and reality check. And what do we mean by these? So perception, if you think about it, is all about your brand, your professional, personal brand, and how you look to package that both in written form and choosing the correct shop windows. So, for example, probably a slightly cheesy analogy, but if you're on the market for a Porsche, you don't turn up to the Ford garage, you know? So the shop window is just as important as the written message itself. And when it comes to the written message, you've also got to recognize that typically your audience, your customer essentially, doesn't possess your expertise. So one of the key elements about the written message is what we would reference as language alignment. So, you know, if I think about my formative career as a headhunter, it was filled with jargon that was appropriate to the role I was in. And, you know, with my colleagues, we all understood that jargon. But there would be certain communities I would reach out to, clients that I would meet, where that jargon was irrelevant. And if anything, it would just seek to confuse. So you've got to be very clear and coherent with language and how you look to position your expertise in a framework that looks like it's value adding and value benefiting to the recipient. Comfort is essentially what happens beyond either you reaching out to an audience or them reaching out to you. And if I was to use one word that summarizes why does Bob get chosen as the interim or Helen as the interim, it's down to one word. It's ultimately who offers the greatest level of comfort to that buying audience. So that's about the verbal exchanges that happen, whether it be from your initial email outreach or a communication by letter. Yes, letters are still a thing. And actually is a very good way of standing out, believe it or not, because how many business leaders actually get receipt of a letter these days, as opposed to a bombardment of emails through LinkedIn? But comfort is also about being consistent and also authentic. So to Tony's earlier point about, you know, you are looking to be hired based on what you are more than able to deliver and will back yourself on being able to deliver. So it's not about trying to be, please hire me based on my potential. It's you need me because I'm essentially the safest pair of hands for you to either resolve your problem or to deliver the opportunity that you visualized. And through that, it's about consistency because particularly with the interim recruitment market or the ISPs as they're referred, consistency for them is quite important because when you go on assignment and you deliver something, you then come back to market. That is one flag in the sand of performance that supports your credibility. It also supports your marketability. And through marketability, it supports your placeability. And that's a perfect equation. And particularly for interim service providers or ISPs, that is what they are after most. There is a term that is used within the executive search and ISP community called MPC. It stands for most placeable candidate. I used to have them in my top drawer when I was a full-time headhunter placing interim and permanent people, and I don't believe for a minute that that has changed. The most placeable candidate is all about consistency, ability to get through selection processes, to land the assignment when they are representing you, but more importantly, investing time in building that relationship, not just to the end client, to give them that trust that you are the right person for them, but also with any intermediaries that may be involved in positioning to introduce. So comfort really is your access route to the opportunities. And then we talk about reality check, and the reality check is almost an extension to authenticity. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you, for example, have a message to market which is not that well aligned, it kind of suggests that you could do a job on an interim basis, you may get the phone call, but from a perception point of view, let's say it's an ISP in the middle, they may think steady Eddie, safe pair of hands, yeah, probably get him at the lower end of the day rate, I'll add him to the shortlist for the client. You then go along and let's say that when you have the engagement either with the recruiter or with the end client, let's just say that you struggle to align language and you kind of say what you want to say, you're not really listening because you're so hardwired to your methodology, your way and approach of doing it, that they may say, well, he can do the job or she can do the job, but I'm not bowled over, I'm not wowed. And then the reality check is a bit like this, where the client says, yeah, you're definitely the person for us. We'd like to offer you the gig. Can I ask what day rate are you looking for? And let's just say, unbeknownst to you, that there is a bandwidth within this day rate where a client will go from, I don't know, 800 a day to 1500 a day. And what we tend to see and tend to find is some of the more experienced people who back themselves on their ability to deliver often fall foul of this the most, because the perception by the client may be, yeah, maybe 800 a day, safe pair of hands. Yeah, we'll get him in. We can buy him or her cheap. They ask you what your day rate is or what your last gig was, and you then turn up and say 1500 a day. So there's a disconnect at that point between perception and reality, and you're not going to get the gig. It actually works the other way around as well, where sometimes people will over egg the perception, over egg the comfort piece. And then when it comes to, wow, 1500 a day, I hope I can afford him. What was your last gig? What are you looking for? Well, actually about 800 a day. Oh. So they're not suddenly going to say, brilliant, I've got a bargain here. I'll offer you £700 a day less. They're going to think the difference between perception and reality is too big. And then lo and behold, you don't get to deliver on assignment. So it's not that it's a complicated regime. For most people, this is almost instinctive. And one of the key skills typically that executives accrue through their permanent career onwards into interim career is a greater sense of, I suppose, introspection about what it is that they want to do, what they're capable of. So generally the perception is fairly well understood. Comfort is normally well versed. You're just transitioning it from a language of framing around, I want a permanent job, to actually, I'm a high impact executive here who is action orientated and can come in and in 3 months or 6 months, turn your solution around, and so on and so forth. So for the most part, even though it's presented as a framework, a lot of people have most of this inherently. You know, it's part of the sort of DNA, I suppose, that people go through as they transition through their executive career. Next slide, please, Charles. So one of the key skills that is required, if we assume that you're very good at supply chain or very good at HR or whatever that functional capability is, then the real requirement is about being able to access those opportunities, those assignments. So what are the channels? How do they actually come to bear? And what is the requirement on you to be able to get your share of the pie, essentially? Now, when we look at this isn't to say that ISPs are first, existing network second, etc., etc. It's just a very easy visual that I'll walk you through. So ISPs are the interim service providers, or the equivalent of an executive search firm, but for interim placement. Now, there's an annual survey that the IIM does, which, as Tony alluded to, has been running for the best part of 15 years. And that's a great starter for 10 resource. Essentially, the Institute has done all of the grunt work, all the heavy lifting. So it's a great starting point for you to get to understand the lay of the land in terms of who is relevant for you. And the key skill there is to invest time and energy in focusing on the right firms, the right consultant within the right firm, and seeking to actively embrace and nurture a relationship with those individuals. Because ultimately you're dealing with people. And who do people generally prefer to deal with? People who look like they're taking an active interest in them, rather than just, have you got any jobs? Have you got any jobs? Have you got any assignments? And 2 weeks later, have you got any assignments? I'm still looking. That's not the way to win them over. That may very well be your intention to gain access to the assignment, but essentially you've got to work with them. Now, ISPs, depending on your sector, depending on your function, will probably take anything between about 15 to 50% of interim assignment opportunities in terms of market share. So it's definitely a group not to avoid. However, what if, for whatever reason, you're just starting out as an interim? You know, ISPs look to levy a margin for the introduction and placement of one of their talent pool. So generally speaking, they prefer to work with an interim that is tried and tested, proven, that's got 1 or 2 gigs in the bag already. Selfishly, it makes that person much more saleable to an intended client audience. So if you're just starting out, you've got to be thoughtful and minded of, well, what can I do to really improve and get out of the starting blocks? The good news, however, is that there's growing demand for interims, both across the full-time interim gig and also what is sort of quite romantically being labelled at the moment fractional interim, which effectively is just a term for part-time gigs. So there is growing demand, which means the ISP community really are looking to add to their network of available interims. So it's actually quite good time to make yourself available and to invest in those relationships. But generally speaking, if you're just starting out, your quickest route to an interim assignment opportunity is through existing network. And it may or may not surprise you through the work that Morphosis Partners do, that nearly 30% of the client success we get for executives just starting out as an interim, we get by looking at their network, enabling them to work it smarter, more effectively, and nearly 30% of the time, that's where that first gig will come from. So existing network, often when we talk to people, they will say, I've exhausted it, they're all retiring off, they're all sunning themselves on beaches somewhere, but actually there's a way and a means of working through it. And one of the key skills is, have you got the ability to think broader than your function of being a supply chain expert or a finance expert, to think more like a sales and marketing or business developer? Because that's ultimately how you get to understand your existing network and the value that may exist within it. And then we've got to think about, well, okay, as Tony alluded to, you may be on this call thinking, well, I've spent, I don't know, 20 years in a permanent career in public sector, and now want more control on the quality and form and type of work that I perform. So I don't necessarily want to reinvent. So the competitor marketplace is actually a very rich hunting ground for assignment opportunities. What do we mean by that? Well, if you spent 15 to 20 years in the public sector, don't be wasting your time showing interest in an interim opportunity in, I don't know, a wealth management company. As much as you may look at it and go, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a change of sector or a slight twist on the function that or the focus of the role that I perform. But when you're being hired to deliver a high impact solution, that desire for you, whilst it may be what you're after, if you put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, they're absolutely going to think this looks like a rather risky equation now. You know, they're not going to pay for that. So sticking with the marketplace where you're better known, better informed, clearly gives you an advantage relative to other individuals who may be looking at that space. And then you've got what's known as situational alignment. By far and away, for the clients that Morphosis Partners support, this is, I suppose, the magic pill. And what do we mean by this? Well, interims can label themselves, for example, as an interim FD, and I deliver interim finance director level solutions. Who wants me? The point about situational alignment is knowing within the broad spectrum of, say, being a finance interim, within that, where the market demand and appetite is, but also where have you tended to find yourself within the business cycle. And it could be that you've had 3 or 4 permanent roles where you've been, for example, I don't know, the go-to FD that's been in a business where they coincidentally have gone through an ERP transformation or an adoption of SAP, for example. So actually that becomes your niche within this broad view of being a finance professional. It's the same with, say, I don't know, supply chain or logistics or HR. You know, are you the HR person who has typically found yourself dealing with the downward swing within a business of, I don't know, performance management, TUPE transfers, redundancies, you know, things like that, carve-outs, divestments? Or have you typically been the HR person who, actually, I'm the go-to person for comp and ben, or the go-to person for, I don't know, talent attraction strategy to support growth? So understanding where within the business cycle is really your best ally. Why? Because when we think about what makes an effective business developer, you can then look at businesses that are announcing to market those situational clues. And your look factor becomes massive when you suddenly knock on that door and say, hello, I've read with interest that you're recently going through a carve-out exercise, and I can see that you've got FTI consultancy in situ to support the consideration of that. By way of introduction, I'm a senior interim professional. who has 2 or 3 times delivered in a permanent capacity those carve-outs. I now do this as an interim professional, which means I can selfishly give you better bang for buck, because I can come into your business free of the politics, free of the red tape, and just focus on doing what my capabilities are going to be able to provide for your organization. And then the final slice of the pie is what we refer to as ripple effect. And ripple effect is nothing more than often, although it is changing slightly, that interims historically found themselves in bigger businesses, PLCs, divisions of PLCs, and the public sector. That is starting to evolve down into the SME ranks of small, medium enterprises beyond a certain size. But the ripple effect particularly is effective when you're talking about larger corporates, because if you deliver something within one division of a business, it's likely that that cog that you've stimulated and influenced is likely to then have a ripple into an adjoining cog in another division within the business, and so on and so forth. And, we can see a lot of individuals who've been able to extend their stay with assignments by literally going from one division of a larger business into another and another. In fact, there's one person I'm aware of who's done that 4 times in succession, and they've been able to stay in one business now for nearly 5 years, but they're interim. Next slide, please, Charles. So why is all of this important? I suppose the simple summary is that if your intention is to be interim, and more importantly, to be in the camp of interims who enjoy, in inverted commas, life as an interim, because it will have its frustrating moments as well as its highs. But, logic says the better that you align yourself to the needs of the market, the more in demand you're going to be. The stronger and the more clear you are about focusing on your strengths, that becomes what people will be drawn to. So the fit piece becomes easier for you to position, to consider. The better you're able to seek out opportunities and land them, well, your reputation is then only going to escalate. And you'll then get this really annoying problem, which some of the people I'm aware of have had, where they end up with multiple assignment opportunities. And they've got to make decisions about, do we do this one or do we do that one? It's a great problem to have. But the point is, what it does do is it puts you in control of your utilization rate. And to sustain as an interim, that's one of the key, I suppose, wins that you want to try and achieve as an interim, which is if you are having downtime, which is inevitable, it's nicer to feel that you're in control of that downtime, as best as you can expect to be. So that's it. That's sort of how you win, how you land assignments, how you business develop. It may seem rather daunting, but in reality, it isn't. It's just about being focused at the end of the day. So hopefully that's been useful. And it'd be great to see if there's any questions coming through, because I don't think we've had any yet. But there we go, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to quickly cover a little bit here, and then they can take us off screen and open up to some Q&A. So just a little bit on the IIM for those of you who are moving into the interim space. So as we said, it's run by interims. It's dedicated to the interests of all interim practitioners. It provides you a long list of things there. I'm not going to read them all out. Plenty of access to all kinds of supporting issues around IR35 or winning assignments, as we've just been talking, contractual advice, all sorts of support network stuff. So useful resource for you. It's the only exclusive professional body dedicated to the individual interim in the industry in the UK. We go through a process of each member's application, has an application fee, and then you are accredited against the standard criteria for membership. The fee on the top right is £106 a year. That's the subscription. There is an initial £40 application fee. And as you can see from the 2 little stars related to the comment at the bottom, if you decide to go ahead and become a member, or apply to become a member, I should say, before the end of March, you can use the Intro to IIM code, and that will waive the £40 application fee, which is non-refundable. £160 a year will then kick in from such point as you are approved and pass through the accreditation process. You can find all sorts of things on the website, bottom right. You can reach out to member services on the email address or the phone numbers on the bottom right as well. That's it in terms of the formal stuff. This deck and the recording will be shared. I will now take us off the share and open up to Q&A. So,
we have a question from James Swaffield, Charles.
okay.
Where he's asking how we talked about needing sufficient experience at whatever level you choose to come into the profession with. How much experience do you need to be credible in your chosen discipline or that level of seniority? I think that's an extremely good question. My personal comment would be it depends on the impact and output in that period you've had that experience. That's what's going to float the boat of the end client. But I think, Simon, you ought to perhaps offer a view in terms of when you're looking to convert if you like, a permanent CV layout and the way that people represent themselves into something that's going to work for an interim.
Yeah, I would say at the moment there's an awful lot and will continue to be demand for people who ultimately are, I don't quite like the labelling because it's too generic, who are labelled as project managers in the interim world. And project managers could be typically maybe, I don't know, don't like to put a time frame on it, but let's say maybe 10 to 15 years of combined collective experience. So they've got the professional qualifications, they've demonstrated it probably in more than one environment. So there is a sense of track record and consistency in a permanent career before they then look to transition. I think if you're coming to the world of interim light of that mark, you're probably going to find yourself positioned more as a contractor, which then brings you into the world of, I suppose, fixed term contracts rather than trading as a business to a business, which is arguably one of the big distinctions, I guess, of an interim professional. So that would be my view on it. So, for example, contractors could be 5 to 10 years of experience doing something, you know, contracting as a HR business partner, contracting as somebody to support procurement for purchasing commodities or whatever it may be. But that's very distinct and different to interim. I think interim, to me, you've got to have worn a badge of leadership in your permanent career within your functional expertise. And that, to me, I think is the signpost for entry.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Yeah.
James, hopefully that answers for you. Any further questions? You're a very quiet group, so we've either done a really good job on you and you've got a great understanding.
Or there's an alarm to wake them up.
Or there's an alarm to wake you up, and we'll find out when we close the meeting and you're all still there. Excuse me.
Oh, there's more coming in now.
There we go.
James is saying thank you, and Brendan has said thank you very much indeed for the presentation. Can I just reinforce as part of your thought process on coming into the profession, looking at becoming independently accredited through the Institute would be very helpful to you, particularly if, as you're looking to build your own network and to start communicating with your own network, that you're now not permanently employed, but you're starting this new career as an interim, and you're looking to engage with clients on that basis with whatever it is that you're wishing to demonstrate is your deliverable. It helps if you can turn to that potential client and say, they may already know you as an individual, to say, I have actually had this, the standards I've achieved accredited independently by the Institute. It is the professional organisation across the field of interim work in the UK. It will help.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Any other questions? A very, very quiet bunch.
Yeah. I'm going to put that down to clear, concise communication.
Absolutely right.
So well done, Simon.
Oh,
the dual event, we're a tag team.
Yeah, yes. I'm just trying to decide whether or not I ought to reposition myself and call myself Joe.
Okay, what's that? We have one more. Yes, Brenda. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I will give a few minutes back then to everybody. So thank you very much. As I said before, the recording and various pieces of information will be shared in the next few days to all those who've registered. And with that, thank you very much to Simon, to Tony, and to all of you who've joined today. And we wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Charles. Much appreciated for leading us through it.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Bye now.
Thank you.